Stop me if you've heard this before. This year is the year when the superhero fatigue finally sets in. For years now, Hollywood has been absolutely dominated by comic book movies. In 2018 alone, there were 7 comic book movie releases, 3 of which even came from a single movie studio. So this makes you ask, why are there so many of these things being made today? Well, the answer to that question actually is pretty simple. I mean, take a look at the box office and it's pretty clear why. As Stephen Strange might say, these movies are making money
on a scale hitherto undreamt of.
Did you seriously just say hitherto undreamt of?
In 2018, Marvel Studios' Black Panther and Avengers Infinity War released within just 2 months of each other, with one making over $1 billion and the other making over $2 billion. So not only are there a lot of these things, but they are hugely successful. This is what brings us to our main point of this video. Where is the limit? Just how popular can these things get before we finally start to see a decline? It seems like this has been a topic of discussion for years. Like superhero movies are the Bitcoin of cinema. Just when you think it's reached max popularity, just when you think it can't get any bigger, the next one comes out, more records are broken, and it does get even bigger. So today, we want to answer this question. Is superhero fatigue real? And if so, how do you explain the exponential success of these franchises?
So to get started, we need to define what people mean when they say superhero fatigue. From what I understand, at its core, it's simply the idea that all superhero movies are more or less the same. Even sometimes I have to convince my wife to go see the upcoming superhero comic book movie because she says it's gonna be the exact same as the last one. In general, you have a hero with some sort of special abilities, maybe a secret identity. You have the run-of-the-mill, mustache-twirling supervillain who threatens the livelihood of the planet in search of power or money or anything else, really. And the movie ends with a big blue beam to the sky, and the hero ends up saving the day, and the forces of good prevail yet again.
And it's also not technically a superhero movie unless it ends with the big blue beam in the sky at the end. I think that's the technical definition.
Anyway, it sounds familiar, doesn't it? All the comic book movies are the same. Their audiences will eventually get tired of seeing them, is the sentiment that falls under superhero fatigue. We're here to explain that this simply is not true. We are here as your local mythbusters. We're not here to tell you that everyone needs to love comic book movies, and we probably also won't convince you, that you should see all of them, because in reality there's too many.
You couldn't. You would die before you saw them all.
We're not here to tell you that you need to start loving comic book movies, and they're not all great, but we are here to tell you that the idea of superhero fatigue is largely a myth that we are prepared to debunk. People tend to generalize when it comes to movies based off of comic books. They have these general ideas, the superpowers, the spandex, the secret identities, fate of the universe. All of this contributes to the idea that they fit into one category. However, if all superhero movies were truly that similar, we definitely would see some fatigue at this point, wouldn't we? I mean, we've gone on 4 years with almost close to 5 superhero
3
movies.
from Marvel Studios alone we've
At least,
been doing for
right?
a while now.
For a few years now, and it seems like we'd already be experiencing some type of fatigue. Yet here we are in 2019, and Avengers Endgame may become the most profitable movie of all time. Well, let me take a deep breath for this next one. It's gonna be a hard hitter. But to help prove our point, we're gonna take a quick look back at 2 scenes from movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. No context or preconceived notions, just watch the scenes. We want you to kind of pay attention to how different the 2 movies feel, both visually and tonally.
Join me and together we'll build my new Lego Death Star.
What?
So lame.
No way, that's awesome. How many pieces?
3,803.
That's insane.
I know. You wanna build it tonight?
I can't tonight. I got the Stark.
Stark internship.
Yeah, exactly.
Always got that internship.
Yeah, well, hopefully soon it'll lead to a real job with them.
That would be so sweet.
Right?
He'd be all, good job on those spreadsheets, Peter. Here's a gold coin. I don't know how jobs work.
That's exactly how they work.
Oh. I'll knock out the basic bones of the Death Star at my place, and then I'll come by afterwards because for the most part, the difficult
That'd be great.
We're gonna neutralize a lot of threats before they even happen.
Thought the punishment usually came after the crime.
We can't afford to wait that long.
Who's we?
After New York, I convinced the World Security Council we needed a quantum surge in threat analysis. For once, we're way ahead of the curve.
By holding a gun to everyone on Earth and calling it protection.
You know, I read those SSR files. Greatest Generation? You guys did some nasty stuff.
Yeah. We compromised. Sometimes in ways that made us not sleep so well. But we did it so that people could be free. This isn't freedom. This is fear.
S.H.I.E.L.D. takes the world as it is, not as we'd like it to be. And it's getting damn near past time for you to get with that program, Cap.
Could you tell the difference between the two movies? That first clip was from 2017's Spider-Man Homecoming, a movie that, despite being a comic book movie, quote unquote, feels more like a coming-of-age story about a teenager in high school. The second clip that we saw was 2014's Captain America: The Winter Soldier. Again, another movie that, despite being labeled as a comic book movie, is much more of a political thriller that explores ideas related to morality and ethics. Superhero fatigue is based off of this idea that after you see one superhero movie, you've pretty much seen them all, or you might be too tired to watch another one. But let me ask you this, do you think that watching a high school comedy would make you tired of watching political thrillers? And this outlines how franchises like the MCU have been so successful. It's dynamic. Each individual movie can be any type of movie that it wants to be, to a certain point, of course. As long as the MCU can keep viewers guessing on what will come next, while telling engaging stories, then it will continue to be successful. I mean, it's that simple. It's really not that complicated. On the other hand, if they fail to keep things fresh, or if they try, the same gags over and over again, it will inevitably begin to fail as people get tired of seeing that.
Right, and this is only a 2-movie sample. Think back to Guardians of the Galaxy. It's a team-based movie, it's a cosmic adventure movie. Basically, it's limitless in where they can go. The whole galaxy is to be explored. And then we could compare that to a really grounded movie like Ant-Man, essentially a heist movie, and he's dealing with his personal relationships within his family, his divorce, and developing his relationship with his daughter. So let's take New Age Star Wars basically started when The Force Awakens came out with roaring success. The modern era of Disney Star Wars was looking really profitable after that. Rogue One and Last Jedi quickly followed and were also very large financial successes. Last Jedi, as we all know, was controversial.
Wait,
really? There was some backlash. No, I'm serious, man. Look it up. There's a few videos on that on YouTube that you can... You know about YouTube? The Last Jedi, whether you liked it or didn't like it, it was a big financial success for Disney Star Wars. But then, something happened, Rock. There's no way of telling what happened with Solo. It could have been maybe from The Last Jedi backlash, or maybe it was simply franchise fatigue, but the movie flopped hard.
Which is crazy to say about a freaking Star Wars movie.
Star Wars, for crying out loud. I mean, people have been eating Star Wars up as much as they possibly could up until this point. This looks like fatigue. This looks like the type of thing that we expect to see with a superhero movie coming soon. I know there's a lot of them, and they make more superhero movies than they do Star Wars ones, but this is the type of thing we expect to see, a real drop-off in profit and the box office success, essentially. But I think the most possible explanation for this fatigue is the fact that really they didn't bring anything fresh. It's a testament to how dynamic the MCU and even other superhero, DC,
any type of franchise,
anyone who's really making superhero movies at this point, they're making them and they're bringing fresh material, things that really excite people, things that get people to buy tickets and end up in the theater. And maybe it was the marketing, or maybe it was people just trying to stick it to the Disney man. Either way, something happened with Solo, and it was the breaking point.
Now, let's hop back to the MCU as an example. We already talked about Black Panther and Infinity War, released just months apart, both made stupid money. I think audiences were well aware of the fact that these were going to be two completely different movies. Black Panther being a character-driven movie about culture, politics, the morality of being a good king, all that. While Infinity War, of course, being that big, giant crossover event that it was, is a completely different type of story, told on a much grander scale. There's a billion characters in it. and the overall general tone and themes of the idea are just different. Now, obviously you could just define both of these movies as action movies or whatever, because I mean they are both action movies, but you get what I mean. The two tell completely different stories in completely different ways. Up until this point, we've explained how movies adapted from comic books can continue to be successful as long as they can keep it fresh. We've even looked at a couple of examples in the MCU of how they've done this really well. However, there is something that we need to address here. I like to call it the DC problem. Now, if you're a huge DC fan, don't worry. When I say this, I don't mean it in a way like DC movies suck and they're a problem. But what I do mean is that there are studios like Warner Brothers who make DC movies and Sony Marvel that have a bad habit of wanting to replicate the success of the MCU by copying their model or their ideas too closely. I think a good example of this would be Aquaman. On its own, it's a fine movie. I actually quite enjoyed it. I thought it was great. There's nothing in particular that's wrong about it, but it just doesn't bring anything new to the table. Because years earlier, you had Marvel Studios making movies like Black Panther and like Thor, which cover a lot of the same territory of Aquaman. Just a couple of parallels off the top of my head would be the Trident in Aquaman being like Thor's hammer, or Atlantis being like Wakanda, you know, that type of thing. And this actually may create a little fatigue, but that's not because it's about a superhero, that's not because it came from a comic book, it's about the similarities in story and theme. Basically, they're just things that we've already seen on the big screen, and not only that, but recently, and therefore audiences might get tired of that type of thing. But it's definitely not because they're comic book movies. Here's something that always comes along with the superhero fatigue argument. They're all the same, or they all follow the same formula, blah blah blah. We've all heard it. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not like superhero movies don't all follow a similar structure, because, I mean, they do. But here's the fact of the matter. Movies are formulaic by nature. That's just the way that it is. People complain that maybe a Marvel movie is too predictable because they know that the heroes always win in the end. But apart from maybe 1% of movies which attempt to do some weird art house stuff, all movies end with the victory for the protagonist. I mean, that's just the way it is. That's the way movies are.
When you buy a ticket to the movies, there's certain assumptions you can make about the movie. There's exceptions to this, but in general, there's going to be a protagonist, an antagonist that challenges the protagonist, and that leads to conflict. There's going to be highs, there's going to be lows. They most often do their lowest lows right before the climax and resolution of the story, and typically the protagonist wins. As I said, there's exceptions to this rule, but in general, this is the formula that most movies follow and the assumption you can make when you enter the movie theater. There's nothing bad about this formula. This is just the model for making satisfying stories, and there's been many books, since Homer and the Iliad and the Odyssey. Essentially, stories have followed a model similar to this because it's satisfying, it's successful. I'm talking about Odyssey over here.
It's tried and true. So I guess if I could wrap all of this up, I would say this. Movies adapted from comic books are very versatile. There are so many comic books to adapt out there that cover all sorts of themes and ideas. The movies will continue to be fresh as long as they can keep supplying audiences with new and exciting ideas, as well as characters and worlds and all that fantasy stuff that people love. Marvel Studios has been able to do this really well, and that is why they've seen massive success and they haven't seen any sort of fatigue. And I'm gonna say this one more time, which I think we've said maybe multiple times throughout this video. If you don't wanna go see any comic book movies, that's fine. I mean, you do you. But don't say that it's because they're all the same or that they're too predictable because you know that the heroes are gonna win in the end, because that is just an unfair statement.
So you could say that you have action fatigue. I'd be okay with that. You could say that you have movie fatigue in general.
You just don't like movies.
Maybe you're just a cynic. But and that's what the point we're trying to get across. Bad stories are bad stories. Good stories are good stories. Take every superhero movie with a grain of salt. Don't judge it by the trailer, because you don't know what direction the filmmaker's trying to go based off that small sample size.
And for any movie in general, not making that judgment before you've seen it.
Right.
Obviously, go and see whatever you want to see, or don't see whatever you don't want to see. But if it's something that you haven't seen, don't bag it as if you've seen it. You know what I mean?
It doesn't help. It doesn't. I mean, even just in discussion, of cinema, something that we both love.
Discussion of cinema.
discussion of cinema. I mean, you shoot down a creative expression and opinion by saying, I know what already is happening. This is, by using assumptions instead of personal experiences.
Exactly. So that just about wraps it up. Let us know what you think about superhero fatigue. Are you freaking sick of superhero movies? Do you want to see one a day for the rest of your life? Let us know, and thank you so much for watching.